Well, a mom gave her daughter a dollar bill and a quarter. And she gave her this dollar bill and a quarter because she wanted to teach her a lesson. She wanted her to learn something. But she gave her a dollar bill and a quarter, and she said, you can put whichever one you want into the offering plate this morning. So she was giving her a chance to give offering, but she was giving her the opportunity to choose what she would give as well. So you could put the dollar, you could put the quarter, whichever you want into the offering plate. So the little girl's sitting there, and it's about the time for offering, and she's holding her dollar and her quarter. And they start taking the offering, and the offering comes by, and she puts in her money. And after the service, her mom decides to talk to her about it to see what she had done. And the little girl said, I was sitting there, and I was planning to give the dollar. But the man who was up front started talking about being a cheerful giver. And I thought I could be a much more cheerful giver if I gave the quarter. So she gave the quarter. Today we're going to be talking about giving. The thing is that for some reason, as soon as this subject comes up, you can just feel tension rise in the room. As soon as you start talking about money or giving, there's just this feeling of, we could talk about so many other subjects, and you know what? There's not a problem at all. We can talk about sin, we can talk about judgment, but as soon as we start talking about money now, that's a problem. And people are uncomfortable and don't like to talk about it. In fact, I've heard people say, I don't go to church, or I don't like to go to church because all they do is talk about money. All they do is ask for my money. All they do is ask me to give my money. Now the thing is we know that's not true. However, some people, all you have to do is mention money, and they're like, they're after my money. We know that we talk about lots of different things. But we don't like to hear people talk about money. On the other hand, I also know some pastors who make sure that they schedule in at least 1 or 2 weeks every year to talk about giving. Of course, when I hear them say things like this, I want to ask a question. And the question is, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because it's an important part of the Christian life, that you want to teach your people how to handle their money correctly, and you want to teach your people that giving is a part of following Jesus? Or are you doing it because you want to make sure that people are giving, because you need the money? And I think there's a right reason and there's a wrong reason to do it. But the fact is, we don't like people telling us what to do with our money. That's just the way it is. We don't like people trying to take our money from us or tell us to give it as well. But I think when it gets down to it, what is at the heart of this problem? I think it comes down to an issue of faith or a lack of faith. Just like every other part of the Christian life, when we talk about giving or we're talking about following Jesus in any other way, it all comes down to faith. And I think the reason why we don't like it when people start talking about money in church is because a faith issue or a lack of faith issue. Because we don't want someone to tell us that we can live on less, or that we can give more, or that we need to do something different with our money. But for some reason, many of us struggle with this issue. But as we come here to the end of the book of Philippians, Paul talks about giving, because Paul has just received a gift from the Philippian church. And I think as we read these verses, it helps us to understand some things about giving, some things about being in need and having enough. And as he talks about these things, he lets us in on a secret. We're going to begin today in chapter 4, verse 10. Paul writes this. He says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Here, as we read this verse in this section, we once again find Paul talking about rejoicing in the Lord. But this time he's not telling them to rejoice in the Lord. He's not giving them an instruction to rejoice in the Lord, but he's telling them how he is or has rejoiced in the Lord because of them, because of the Philippian church, because of what they have done for them. And in saying this, he is actually expressing his thankfulness for them. In fact, he is so thankful because they have sent them a gift and have supported him. He is so thankful for them that he has rejoiced. And he says he has rejoiced greatly in the Lord. But why is he rejoicing about them? Well, he says here, he says, I've rejoiced greatly because you have revived your concern for me. That's why he's rejoicing. They have revived their concern for him. See, what the Philippian church had done is that they had taken a collection and they had sent a monetary gift in order to support him and his ministry. But the interesting thing here is that Paul doesn't directly mention their gift. At least not yet. Not till later on, a few verses down. But here, his focus is on their concern for him. He says that you have revived your concern for me. See, more than the gift, what he's rejoicing about is their concern for him. That they care about him and that their concern for them caused them to take up this collection and send this gift to him. And he is so happy that they love him and that they want to care for him. They care about him and his ministry, and they want his ministry to continue. But notice what he says here. He says that I've rejoiced because now at length you have revived your concern for me. Now this word at length, it has the idea of at last or finally or after a long while. And as you read this, you could almost take that as kind of a little slight rebuke or a slight, scolding, like, finally you took a collection and sent it to me. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think Paul is scolding them at all here. I don't believe this is some kind of a backhanded compliment. Like, whew, it's about time you gave me that. That was a great thing you did for me. I only had to wait so many months. I don't think this is a backhanded compliment. And to make it clear, he adds that second sentence of this verse where he says, you were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. You see, he knows that they actually had concern for him even before, but they had no opportunity to act upon that concern. Now, we don't know what it was that kept them from giving earlier, but for some reason they hadn't. But now that they had the opportunity, now that they were able to, they did. And so it says, I rejoice that you have revived your concern for me. And then look at verse 11. Beginning of verse 11, he says, not that I am speaking of being in need. Now, this little statement is a clarification. You see, he's just been talking about his great gratitude, about how he has rejoiced about their giving this gift to him. And he's thinking that, this great gratitude, this great rejoicing may suggest that he was anxious, or that he felt like he was in need, or that he was worried about what was going to happen, and that when he got this gift, it alleviated his fears, it alleviated his worry. So he makes this clear, and he says, not that I am speaking of being in need. He's saying, I'm not rejoicing because I had felt impoverished or needy in any way. Which is interesting, because whatever his actual financial situation was, he didn't feel needy. Now, what was his actual financial situation? We don't know exactly, but it probably wasn't great, because if you remember, he was in prison. And he had to support himself while he was in prison. And so he probably didn't have a lot. He wasn't being able to work. He was under house arrest. He probably didn't have much. He may have actually been in great financial need. But he says, but I did not feel needy. I did not feel impoverished. In other words, he wasn't sitting around wondering, how am I going to make it? He wasn't sitting around being anxious or concerned. He wasn't sitting around thinking, boy, I really hope someone sends me some money. Boy, I really need this. I hope someone will give me a gift. So whether he was in a great need, actually was in great need or not, he wasn't worried about it. And I think this is a very fitting point for him to make, because if you remember what we saw last week in verse 6, he said this. He had just told the Philippian believers, he said, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God. He had just told them, you need to trust God. Don't be anxious about anything. Stop worrying, trust God. And he says, when you worry, pray. So don't worry, but pray. And Paul is putting this into practice. He is living this out. He's not being anxious. He's just trusting God for all of his needs. And this is why you could say he didn't feel a need. But he continues on to tell us that he didn't feel that he was in need because he had learned contentment. Look at verse 11 through 13. He says, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. He says here that I have learned how to be content. And this tells us something. Contentment isn't something that you just wake up one morning and have. You don't just wake up and all of a sudden say, hey, a lot, a little, I'm okay. But this is something that he learned over time. This is something that as he went through his experiences and had times of plenty and times of little, that he learned how to be content and he learned how to trust God in whatever situation he was in. But this also tells us something that if you struggle with contentment, that you can learn it. It's not something that's beyond you. It's not something that's completely out of your grasp. But that we can learn contentment as Paul learned contentment. It may take some time, but it is possible to learn it. But he says here that he knew how to be content, no matter what his situation was. In other words, he knew how to live well as a follower of Jesus, whether he had a lot or a little. He knew how to live right, with a right attitude. He knew how to live with the right heart before God. And he gives these two basic situations. He says, I know how to live right if I've been brought low. In other words, if he had been humbled by poverty and he was living in great need and he was even going hungry, he says, I can be content. I can have the right attitude. I can live in right or live well before God because I'm trusting him. And he also says that I can live well if I am abounding. So if he had an abundance, if he had all that he needed and more, this word, that's the idea of overflowing. So you have more than enough. Well, some of us may think, well, it's a whole lot easier to be content in that situation, right? But it's not always true. Sometimes when you have more than enough, you get greedy. And you want even more. But he says, I know how to be content in either situation, whether I have way too little or way more than I need. I know how to be content. And really, these are the two extremes. And he says, so if I have way too much or way too little, or anywhere in between, I've learned to be content. Whether he has a whole lot or very little, his circumstances don't change his mindset. Don't change his heart. He's able to be content. He's able to be at ease. He is able to have peace. He's able to be satisfied with whatever he has. And he says, I'm able to do this because I learned the secret. And the good thing is he doesn't keep it a secret. He tells us. And the secret is that Jesus gives him the strength to do it. Jesus, no matter what situation Paul is in, with a lot or little, Jesus gives him this strength. He enables him to live with contentment. And he says it this way. He says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. The thing about verse 13 there, where he says that I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Now, this is a favorite verse of many people. And it is quoted many times, but almost every time it is quoted, it's ripped out of its context. This verse is not just a verse of motivation. It's not just a verse that you put on your mirror to say, hey, I can do this. I can get through this hard time. It's not just a verse that says, no matter what, I can get through difficult times, or if I'm an athlete, I can win this game. Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It doesn't say that I am able to do anything or everything because Christ strengthens me. I was reading one writer this week who said about this verse. He says, if you're a golfer, or maybe you're not a golfer, but you decide one day I'm going to be a golfer, or you're a golfer who never practices, and you step up to the tee box, that's where you hit the ball first, for those non-golfers here. You step into the tee box and you say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I'm going to hit a 70 today. That's a very good score for those of you who don't golf. I've never done it. But you step in the tee box and said, I'm going to hit a 70 today because I can do all. That is not what this verse is saying. Now, I do think it's probably appropriate to apply this idea of this verse to being able to live for Christ and to fulfill his purposes in your life because he gives you strength. However, here, the immediate context gives you the actual understanding or immediate meaning of this verse where Paul writes it here. And that is that Christ gives the believer the ability to live contentedly in any and all circumstances, whether he has much or whether he has little. And this word all that's translated, I can do all things, this word all or every, it's thrown up to the very front of the verse for emphasis, but it also ties into the previous verses or the previous words that were just spoken. It looks directly back to those previous circumstances that he had just listed off. Having much, abounding, or having very little, in going hungry. I can do either. I can do all through Christ who strengthens me. That's why I can be content. That's the secret. And so when a believer keeps his heart right, and keeps his mind right in dependence upon God and fully trusting God, he's able to cope with any situation and to live well in any situation, whether he's rich or poor, whether he has more than enough or not enough, because Christ strengthens him. You see, being content, it's not about how much money you have. It's about living by faith. It's about having faith in God and trusting him no matter what. Whether you have much or little. Trusting him. Well, at this point in the passage, he makes another clarification. There's several of them through here. He doesn't want people to misunderstand him, but he makes another clarification. And even though he can be content, he wants to make sure they understand that their gift was both good and important. So he says in verse 14, he says, yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. He'd been saying, I've learned to be content. He says, but thank you. I've learned to be okay with whatever I have, but thank you for your gift. He didn't want to mislead them or have them misunderstand and think that he wasn't grateful for what they had done for him. Just because he was content doesn't mean that their help wasn't needed. Just because he had learned to be content doesn't mean that their help wasn't really appreciated. In fact, he says it this way. He says that was kind of you. But notice what he says. He says it was kind of you to share in my trouble. It was kind of you to share my trouble. He says that they are sharing or participating with him in his hardships. What are his hardships right now? Well, he's in prison and he is suffering. Why? Because of his ministry for Christ. And they have come along and taken a share in that suffering. They have helped him in that. They are joining him in this suffering for Christ. You see, through their monetary gift, they are actually coming along and actively partnering with Paul in his ministry. They're saying, here, we are coming alongside of you and we are taking part in this ministry so that you are able to continue your ministry and continue living, doing this, serving Christ in this way. The thing is that many missionaries or ministries, if you hear them talk about the people who support them, they call them partners. And I think this is a biblical concept because that's what Paul is talking about the Philippians here. He's saying, you have taken and become partners with me in ministry. And so just like missionaries and churches and ministries today, when people give, they are partnering in ministry together because they are enabling that ministry or enabling that missionary to go out and continue the work of the ministry. Without their support, they would not be able to do it. And so you are partnering with them and you are taking part in their work and taking part in their ministry. But after saying this, Paul then goes and he recounts for them how they have been involved in his ministry. He recounts for them their partnership with him in his ministry. And he tells us that we see that they've been doing it for a long time. This has been a long-term partnership. And we see in verses 15 and 16, he says, and you, Philippians, yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once and again. He tells them here, he says, you know what you've done. He doesn't need to tell them, but he points this out to show his gratitude for them. And he says, and he wants to make it clear that though he is fully reliant on Christ and to care for him, that it's a good thing that they have given to him, and it was right for them to give to him. Because they have supported him in his ministry. And Christ provided for him through their gift. Christ provided for him and his ministry through their generosity. And Paul gratefully accepts that gift. And he uses a couple terms in here that are, he talks about giving and receiving. These are business terms, and it suggests that this went down just kind of like a business deal. You gave me financially, and I received it, and maybe I gave to you spiritually, but there's a lot more to it than that. Paul isn't just thinking of this just in simple monetary terms of giving and receiving, but he talks about them, how they alone gave to him, about their unique relationship that they have with him. He's talking here about we have a relationship that's been going on and ongoing, and that we are partnering together. And as the gospel is spreading, we have this relationship and this partnership that is continuing. And Paul is thankful for them. And so I want you to recognize something, that when you give money to the church or to a missionary or to some other ministry, you're doing more than just keeping the lights on or paying the water bill or making sure the pastor is fed or making sure the missionary has clothes to wear. But you're partnering in ministry with them. You are supporting those people so they can continue to do the work that God has called them to do. And so you are coming alongside and you are an important part of the ministry. You are truly partnering and truly participating in that ministry with them because your gifts allow them to continue the work that Christ has called them to do. But all that being said, Paul has another clarification, verse 17 and 18. He says, not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts that you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. He begins here saying, his clarification is not that I'm seeking the gift, but I'm seeking something else. Not that I'm seeking the gift. So don't misunderstand me, he says. He's not expressing this gratitude in order to get more from them. He's not saying thank you so that they'll give him another gift. He's not being covetous here. He's not being greedy and just saying, oh, thank you. Keep it coming. He's not like the kid who comes over to someone's house and says, remember the last time I was here and you gave me this? That was so good. You know, wink, wink. I want it again. That's not what Paul's doing here. He's not saying, oh, thank you. He's truly just saying that he's thankful. But he's saying, he wants them to know, I'm not seeking or pursuing the gift. I'm not longing after or actively searching out gifts for myself. He could say it this way, that's not my heart's desire. This is. I'm not seeking out the gift. I'm seeking this. I'm seeking something else. And what he's seeking for is their good. Not his own, but their good. But he assures them that he has received the gift that they sent. And that it was enough. That his needs have been met. But let's talk again a little bit more about their good, what he is seeking. He's seeking their good. He says it this way, I'm seeking that the fruit that increases to your credit. In other words, what he wants is he wants them to receive credit with God or from God. He wants them to be pleasing to God. Now this credit, he uses accounting terminology here. Much like the business words earlier, he's still using that accounting terminology. It's kind of like compounding interest. And if you know what compounding interest is, that's when you put money in, well, not in the bank, because you don't earn interest at the bank anymore, but you invest your money somewhere, and you earn some interest, and you leave that interest in there. You don't pull it out, but you leave it there, and then that interest starts earning interest. And then that starts earning interest. And your money starts growing, and all of it compounds, and it grows. And so when he talks about this, I want this credit, the fruit of the credit to be added to your, or the fruit of your to be added to your credit. He's talking about this kind of idea of this compounding interest, of that when you do something for Christ, that it's added to your account. And when you do something for Christ, or you give here to support this work, that person then goes out and uses that to do here, and you've reached these people and these people, and then those people you reach people, and then those people will go out and work with people. And you see that your gift here has grown, and it has done so much more than what you could have done if you just held on to that money. So he says here, you have given this, and it's now given to your credit. You've made a difference in these people's lives, who've made a difference in those people's lives, who's made a difference in those people's lives. And it has grown and grown, and there's fruit that increases to your credit. They've invested in the gospel ministry through their gifts, through their partnership. And now it's been added to their account. The difference they have made is growing. The impact they have made in their life is growing. What I think is interesting is what Paul is saying is that they're doing what Jesus said to do. What did Jesus say? He said, store up for yourself treasures in heaven. That's what they're doing. They're saying, I'm going to give to this so that the kingdom of God grows. I'm storing up for myself treasures in heaven. But now we get down to the heart of the issue of giving. And the heart of the issue of giving here is that it's all about pleasing God. And it's about giving to Him. It's not just about money. It's not just about making a transaction, but it's about giving to God. In fact, Paul says here, he says that this gift that they gave was a fragrant offering to God. It was a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. He's saying this is right and this is good. And he uses these words that are taken from the sacrificial system, the Old Testament sacrifices. He says this is right, this is good. That you're giving to support the ministry or to further the ministry is a sacrificial offering to God. And when he says this, uses the word sacrifice, I think he wants you to recognize you may be sacrificing. You are giving something up to further the ministry, but you are giving it to God. I love this definition of sacrifice. A sacrifice is giving up something that you love and cherish for something that you love and cherish more. I'll say that again. Giving up something that you love and cherish for something or someone that you love and cherish more. So if you give your money, something you love and cherish, to God, you're doing it because you love and cherish Him more. And you're willing to sacrifice or give up something that is important, maybe even something you think you need, to give it to God. It's an offering to Him, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice that is acceptable and pleasing. And though when you give, you may be supplying the material needs of an individual or a ministry, it's not just a fact of meeting worldly material needs. And therefore it's not unimportant. But it is first and foremost a gift to God. It is an important spiritual activity. And that one, when you do it and you do it cheerfully, He finds acceptable or worthy. And He is pleased with it. Well, now we get down to the fact of the matter. Verse 19. He says, "And my God will supply every need of yours according to His riches and glory in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen." You see, the Philippian believers, they had given to Paul they had given to God in order to meet Paul's needs. And Paul now says then that God will meet your needs. He says, my God will supply all your needs. You see, now we're getting right back to the idea of contentment and trust, right? When I said we're getting down to the fact of the matter is God will provide. You just have to trust Him. God will provide. You just be content with what you have and trust Him. The thing is God has no shortage of wealth. He has no shortage of anything for that matter. He has no shortage of wealth, and He is able to care for His own who are in Christ Jesus. The thing is that it takes faith to be generous. You got to trust Him. It takes faith to be generous, especially if you don't have very much. Because you have to believe that this statement is true. What he says in verse 19, that my God will supply your needs according to His riches and glory. You have to believe it. And you have to trust Him. It takes faith. But maybe you're here and you say, well, you know what? I don't have that kind of faith. Or maybe I need greater faith. And I would say, ask Him for it. It reminds me of the father who brought his son to Jesus and he wanted him healed. And Jesus said, do you believe? And he said, I believe, help my unbelief. In other words, I have belief, but I know it's not perfect. I have some faith, but I know it's not perfect. I could grow in it. If you have faith, but you say, I want more faith, I need more faith, then ask for faith. You say, I want to be able to give, but I don't trust well enough. Then ask him. Because maybe you're sitting here thinking, I can't give. And I would say, try it. Just try it. Give a little. You don't have to say, okay, I know I'm supposed to give. Here's my whole paycheck. Start somewhere. Start small. Just give a little. Try it. And trust God to provide for you. J.D. Rockefeller, who had millions and millions of dollars, once said this. He said, I never would have been able to tithe the first $1 million I ever made if I had not tithed my first salary, which was $1.50 per week. He said, I never would have given from all that money if I hadn't started at the beginning. So we can start small. Just start somewhere. Give and trust. To give an offering that God is pleased with, you may have to sacrifice. But he's worth it, and he will provide. It still may be hard. But I want you to look at one last thing. Look what Paul says in verse 23. So after he gives the greetings to different people, in verse 23 he says, the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. Now this is his prayer for the believers. He's praying that the grace of Jesus would be upon their lives. That they would experience the grace of Jesus. That in these areas where they struggle or where they're having a hard time, that his grace would be shown to them and that they would be able to live for Christ. Now, I believe this statement, he's saying this about everything he's talked about in the book of Philippians. And even more, that they would be able to live for Christ because his grace has been given to them. But this is even true in the area of giving. This area that he has just talked about. That the grace of Jesus will enable you to live for him. And even to give. That means you can start somewhere. You can start small. And trust God. Because Jesus will strengthen you. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. You see, giving is not really an issue of how much money you have or don't have. Giving is an issue of faith. It's by faith that we can learn to be content, whether we have plenty or not enough. It is by faith that you can know, and when I say know, I mean be convinced that God will provide for you. And then fully trust him. And it's by faith that you can be a cheerful giver.